we on the program tonight, we're going to look at a passage of Scripture that's found in the book of Revelation in the closing chapters of it. The Bible tells us that God is going to destroy them that destroy the earth, which then tells us that the destruction of the earth that you see during the tribulation period, before then, but mainly that terrible destruction that's going to take place during the tribulation period, the last 7 years of this age. The Bible says that man is actually the one that's doing it. So let's put it in proper perspective. God has not allowed man to turn the weapons loose upon himself, of which he has created with his own hands. Should God allow that to take place, then please understand, it would be a wrath of God. It would be the wrath of God. He is no longer restraining man who has gone extremely wicked from harming himself. But the hour is going to come that God is going to remove his hand, that God is going to allow man to do that is in his own heart. The weapons that's been created in the world today possesses the ability, as we all know and are aware of, possesses the ability to destroy the entire earth. In fact, the business is, with just the nuclear weapons that we have, the different nations possess, we could destroy the earth some 100 times over, and we could do it in approximately 40 minutes. That's frightening. But when you think about what the book of Revelation tells us and warns us of the terrible judgments that's coming, trouble such as the world has never known nor shall ever know again, then I want you to understand that we have the ability to cause every bit of that trouble our own selves. The point that I'm trying to make is this. You don't have to believe in God to know that what the Bible is saying is true. You may want to be stubborn and stiff-necked and deny that God exists, but you cannot deny that 2,000 years ago, throughout the book of Revelation, we were told of things that were not possible to take place until now. We are able to destroy the entire world. Now this brings us to a particular weapon and some questions that's out there and some things that maybe needs to be answered. We have nuclear and hydrogen, we have supersonic weapons, we have all kinds of weapons, things that you don't know anything about, things that the other governments don't know anything about. They tell us that the technology is some 30 to 40 years advanced in the military than it is here in the private sector. There is literally no telling what we have the ability to do. One of the things that has come into question over the past few years is a thing called weather war. That is the ability for mankind to actually guide hurricanes, steer them where they want them to go, to bring down lightning, to cause lightning bolts to strike a particular place in the earth. Now, I know that all of that sounds very science fiction, but as we'll see tonight, we have had that technology, and we certainly have that technology here and now to cause rain, to cause droughts. Now, there's a project that is in Alaska that is called the HAARP Project. Many of you knows about the project. It's an array of antennas that we were experimenting by heating up the ionosphere. Silly as it is, whenever the patents was used and the work began, the government acknowledged that they did not know what exactly it would cause. The scientists doing the experiments, tampering with the very ecosystem that keeps us alive. And they did not know what the results was going to be. That was in their own writings. By doing this, they are able to manipulate the jet stream. The jet stream is what causes our weather patterns. And with the jet stream, you're able to move hurricanes. You would be able to destroy hurricanes. You would be able to possibly even intensify hurricanes, but you could certainly guide hurricanes. Is all of this the truth? And other than conspiracy websites and so forth and so on, what do we have to prove that it's real? Well, I'm going to show you some clips here tonight that I think makes the point and makes it very, very clear. The first clip that I'm going to show you is Senate and Congressional hearings that was taking place over the weather war. Now, another thing that is vitally important with this is that, of course, these technologies are created with the intentions, or at least it's presented, that it is for good intentions. For an example, if there are droughts over the farm belt where our food comes from, then they could seed the clouds and cause it to rain. Wonderful and good. As it is with man, if you do create the ability to control weather, and it is for the good purposes of what I just mentioned, then it has to come to mind that if I'm able to cause rain here, I could cause rain there. If I'm able to cause earthquakes here, then I could cause earthquakes there. Now this technology has been weaponized. Now I could cause it to flood or be droughts in my enemy's food belt. Now I could cause earthquakes to take place in certain locations or pretty close to where I wanted it to happen. So if I'm able to do it, then they're able to do it. And as I had mentioned earlier, the HAARP project, this array of antennas that heats up the ionosphere and gives us the ability to do all these things that I just said, we're not the only country that possesses it. Russia possesses it, China possesses it, and other nations possess it. Now, us realizing how wonderful this would be, that we could either stop rains that's causing floods, or we could cause rain in areas that it was drought, well, we have to then understand that it can be weaponized. And if our enemy can weaponize this weapon against us, then we must learn how also to weaponize it against them. That's the only way that it can possibly work. So it now becomes a weapon. So the ability to control storms, to create earthquakes, to create lightning bolts, is now a weapon of war. Well, is it true? Or is it science fiction? I'm going to take you through a series of testimonials in the Congress, this very subject being discussed. Now, if we're talking about nothing more than flakes or conspiracy buffs, the Congress would not waste their time on hearings pertaining to a subject that was nothing more than a fiction created in the mind of somebody. But yet we have had Senate and Congressional hearings on this matter. The weaponizing of weather. The first clip will be the Congressional hearing on this very matter. Now, you will have to listen closely. There'll be a couple of things that's said and a couple of things that's mentioned that will be very important in what you're about to hear. But listen closely as the Congress takes up this issue concerning weaponized weather.
Mr. Fletcher, another question on in an interview with the Los Angeles Times on April 21st, you said that you told the Associated Press that the American government has created weather tampering techniques so that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and to control the rest. Would you explain what you were trying to say?
Well, what I was trying to say is exactly what I said. There is weather control techniques. We have a complete package on that, which I did not bring, but I certainly will see to it that it is brought in for the record. Number one, the entire patents on the equipment. Number two, Senator Claiborne Pell's complete statement and story of his own that not only does it exist, but that we even utilize it as far back as the Vietnam War. You might want to touch base
That's
with
right,
Senator
but
Pell.
I just want to repeat before I turn to
So yes, but we
you're
do
saying
have
that
all
the
that
government-
information.
You're saying the government has created weather tampering techniques so that the, quote, New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans.
Worldwide.
Millions of Americans, and to control the rest.
Yes, sir, and that's my belief. As bizarre as that sounds, if somebody had told me that that equipment even existed 10 years ago, I would have thought they were nuts, sir. And at this point in time, we have all the documents to prove it. And if you think that 85 tornadoes takes place in the middle of our growing area by simultaneous accident, I'm sorry. With the equipment that's already set up internationally, and as bizarre as that is, it is proven and documented. We will supply you with those documents. As bizarre as that is, I would say that weather wars, and this is quoting actually Senator Claiborne Pell himself, that they are the greatest weapon ever created in the world, and that's the senator's own statement. So yes, I do stand on that.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
The gentleman that you just heard made statements and quoted from a Senator Claiborne Pell. Claiborne Pell made these statements that I'm fixing to read to you, so bear with me. It's not good to read on television, but I want to read what Claiborne Pell said. This goes back to 1975. Weather weapons, weather control, weather modification techniques is not something that is new. This goes back to 1975 when Senator Claiborne Pell was warning and discussing this very issue before Congress. Here's what Mr. Pell wrote or stated. The United States and other world powers should sign a treaty to outlaw the tampering with weather as an instrument of war. It may seem far-fetched to think, Mr. Claiborne said, of using weather as a weapon, but I'm convinced that the United States did in fact use rain-making techniques as a weapon in the Vietnam War. He goes on, we need a treaty now to prevent such actions before the military leaders of the world start directing storms, manipulating climates, and inducing earthquakes against their enemies. He goes on, the basic idea of environmental warfare is simple. If a nation can learn to trigger natural events, it can inflict terrible damage on an enemy through rainfall, flooding, tidal waves, earthquakes, and even climate changes that could devastate an enemy nation's agriculture. It may seem a great leap of imagination that such science fiction ideas as unleashing earthquakes, melting polar ice caps, changing the course of warm ocean currents, or modifying the weather of an adversary's farm belt. But in military technology, today's science fiction is tomorrow's strategic reality. Apart from the sheer horror of the prospect of unbridled environmental warfare, there is, I believe, another compelling reason to ban such action. We know, or should know by now, that no nation can maintain for long a monopoly on new warfare technology. If we develop weather warfare techniques, so can and will other nations and powers. They will experience the experiences that has been taught to us that the weapons that make us feel secure today will make us very insecure tomorrow. Indeed, when our adversaries possess the same capabilities. Now is the time to act, so we never have to worry about countries directing storms at one another. Those was the words of a senator in 1975. The manipulation of weather was taking place during the Vietnam War, and actually before that. So this is not new technology now. This is technology that's been around 80 or more years. Now I'm going to play you a leading scientist in the world, a physicist. as he is being interviewed about these weather weapons and what's taking place in laboratories and what we now have the ability to do. Listen closely.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right, lasers now.
We physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. In the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam. You name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Incredibly interesting, Professor Michio Kaku. Thank you so much.
The Bible tells us that at the time of the end, knowledge shall increase. The Bible tells us of trouble such as the world has never known, nor shall ever know again. That's coming. Whenever knowledge greatly increases, and you have a de-Christianized, godless world, when you have knowledge that almost supernaturally increases, and wisdom decreases, then you have the recipe for destruction. The ability to create lightning bolts and with some precision point them where you want them to hit. The ability to cause tidal waves. The ability to control the climate. The ability to set off earthquakes, cause rains and droughts. All of that is here. Again, this is not new technology. I've already read to you quotes from a senator dealing with this in 1975. But let's go back further in this weather weapon campaign. Let's go all the way back to 1961, where John F. Kennedy spoke of it.
We shall propose further cooperative efforts between all the nations in weather prediction and eventually in weather control. We shall propose, finally, a global systems of communication satellites linking the whole world in telegraph and telephone and radio and television. The day need not be far away when such a system will televise the proceedings of this body to every corner of the world for the benefit of peace.
Mr. Kennedy was talking about a rising technology, our ability to predict weather, and as he said, our ability to control weather. It's 1961. This is when televisions were still black and white, and not every home had one. He proceeded to talk about the technologies that was coming that was all so foreign to the group of people that was listening to it at that time. The ability to watch the same TV show at the same time, all over the entire world. Satellite television, which did not exist then. Worldwide communications, and worldwide communications instantly. Now we have a generation that is 40 years old who has never not known satellite television. They've never lived without it. They've never lived without worldwide communications. It's normal, it's natural to them. But that was a new frontier in 1961. That was a new world in 1961. That was technologies that people could not believe could possibly even exist. And now today, they're all commonplace. But please understand, with the technology of television, satellites, and worldwide communication simultaneously, was thrown in weather prediction and weather control. Now, are we to believe that the other technologies soared to where they are now? But that would have been first on the mind of the military, the weaponizing of war, of weather. Would we pretend to ourselves that it has not proceeded at least as fast as the technologies did pertaining to worldwide communication and satellites? The weaponizing of weather would have been on the top burner, first in priority. That was 1961. They were already seeding clouds and making great rains fall in Vietnam. The next clip I want to show you is the man who followed after Kennedy was assassinated, LBJ, the president. Listen to what he says about weather weapons and weather control.
It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
He will ultimately control the weather, Mr. Johnson said. And he who controls the weather controls the world. Weather was being weaponized, and the ability to control weather and climates and all the things we've talked about in the early 60s. Not just being able to seed clouds and cause rainstorms, but now we were talking about controlling weather. All the things Senator Pell spoke of some 15, 16 years later. The ability to set off earthquakes, weaponizing weather, calling for a ban to take place on all nations not to do this. Well, you know how bans and treaties work. They're useless. So the point is very, very clear. The idea of weather control, weather modification, and steering storms is by no means a new idea. It is by no means a stretch of the imagination. Set aside conspiracy nuts on the internet. These are presidents of the United States. These are senators of the United States of America. These are the world's top physicists. It's all here. This then brings us to some understanding. Let's go to the word now, global warming and climate control, or the changing of the climate due to global warming. Global warming has never been proved. Fact of the business is, all credible scientists say that there is no way possible that man is causing the problem by the means of which they say flying jets and burning coal. Why then is this idea of global warming pressed and pushed so hard? Why is it like a religion to the United Nations and globalized politicians? Why is it that the other side of the community of scientists cannot speak nor be heard? Who says there's nothing to this, it can't happen. They are completely dismissed. None of their findings ever recorded. The United Nations took global warming and took an array of scientists to report on it. When the scientists gave the United Nations their findings that it was no problem, the United Nations officials altered the writings of the scientists, and the United Nations officials, not even scientists, they altered what the scientists gave them to make the report say what they wanted it to say. That's a proven fact. There is no such thing as global warming. Science proves that. And anytime anybody speaks with authority but yet will not allow the opposing side to speak, that tells you instantly who the liars are. Because no person of truth is ever afraid any at all. He is never afraid to be confronted by the other ideas. It is only those who are lying and deceiving that cannot allow the other side to speak. So then what is global warming really all about? Well, it is about climate change. And we do see crazy weather systems. But now we know beyond any shadow of a doubt that man has the ability, has been, and is tampering with the weather. Since Donald Trump came in to office, we have gone some 11 years without a hurricane of any size entering the Gulf. Since Katrina. Now all of a sudden, Mr. Trump comes in to the presidency. Now we have already had 3 natural disasters hit all 3 coastlines: Houston, Miami, and the Gulf Coast. The point is this: there is a vehement hatred of Donald Trump and what they call now the politicizing of government organizations that were never meant to be politicized. It's never meant to politicize, and extremely dangerous to politicize the FBI, the IRS, the CIA, the Department of Justice. But Obama politicized it. He put those in there with his mindset. Saul Alinsky, overthrowing the United States. They call them the deep state now, causing constant disorder. The question then is, who is it that is controlling the HAARP project or the weather weaponizing of our time? It's there. Somebody has their finger on it. Somebody has their hands on the lasers that move storm patterns. Have those people become politicized also? It's the strange weather that we're seeing now, and destructive storms and weird weather patterns. A new power that's being unleashed against a president who wants America to be first and is driving these globalist nuts crazy. These things are very real. Weather weapons and weather control is a very real thing, and it is a very dangerous thing, and it is in the hands of men who have not just become politicized, they have become demonized.